Hello and welcome to another edition of Ask the Experts here on 570 News Radio. Faisal Susiwala has been serving the Waterloo region since 1988. He's a broker of record with Remax Twin City, recently named the top-selling agent in Canada, and is also recognized as the #1 individual Remax agent worldwide. Faisal is the author of the book The Real Deal, Billion-Dollar Real Estate Broker. He's always someone we can count on to give us some thoughtful advice when we look at the local real estate market. And he's always willing to share his time. Welcome back to the show, Faisal.
Thanks for having me on, Brock.
Thanks for being here. Listeners, if you're interested in any of the information we discuss over the next hour, please reach out to Faisal. You can start your journey at homeshack.com. You can also call Faisal directly, 519 624 5555, or by email, Faisal@homeshack.com. We'll also be uploading this show to the 570 News Radio website for you to listen to again. All you need to do is click on the Listen tab, and it will take you there. So, Faisal, we've managed to get through what always feels like the longest month of the year. If we start off with a market update, where are we these days when it comes to real estate locally now that January's in the rearview mirror and we're almost halfway through February?
Well, there's still a little bit of that January hangover lingering on, and I think this one is politically driven. We have seen a lot of uncertainty in the market, and the tendency when there is uncertainty is to do nothing. And
Right.
that's exactly what a lot of buyers, a lot of sellers are just sort of sitting again on the sidelines, waiting to see what is going to happen, what's going to happen with rates, what's going to happen with tariffs, what's going to happen with supply. Are values going to continue to rise? Are rates going to continue to go down? So there's a lot of uncertainty. And it's in those times of uncertainty, of course, there's opportunity for those who are willing to stomach it. But for the massive amounts of people that are entering into the real estate market or even thinking of downsizing, retiring, are saying, well, we better just wait and see what happens next before we make that move because they don't want to be caught in that crossfire of political uncertainty that we're seeing today.
Yeah, you bring up a lot of good points, and I like that idea of that January hangover. We're still, and we're in the middle of it again. Every time you turn on the TV or you're looking online, we're pulled right back into it, and it's you're right. It's that idea of maybe kind of waiting to see. But the problem is, it's every day there's more to see, and we just can't seem to get ahead of the curve sometimes.
Yeah, that's exactly the challenge that we're going to have. But again, notwithstanding what's happening right now, when we look at what has happened over the past few years, there's some great opportunity to enter the market right now. Despite where the interest rates are, we've had one cut already, and we're going to talk a little bit more about what to expect next. But there's still, a very flat line on the pricing. So opportunity is existing right now to be able to purchase something ahead of further rate cuts and really benefit from that. So again, that herd mentality is always in the back of people's minds that, I'm going to wait till my friends do it. But I would still advise you to get some professional advice and get out there and start looking and understanding what the market is. Because before you know it, you're going to be back into that bidding war situation, and it's going to be very difficult to get a home at an affordable price.
Yeah, and you touched on this just briefly as well too. We know that the word tariff is on everyone's lips these days. From your experience, Faisal, what impact do you see coming down the road when it comes to tariffs? How is that going to impact the Canadian housing market?
So it's a ripple effect on the Canadian housing market because it depends on which goods are targeted. Of course, we just heard about the steel and aluminum. Lumber may be next. We don't know exactly where this is going to end up, but 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum, that's a significant tariff, which will cost builders more to construct, and that cost has to be passed down. So in builders, new construction is already suffering as it is, add increased costs. But it's not just new home construction. We have to think about the impact on renovations. If you're thinking about renovating your home and all of a sudden the items that you're purchasing for your home have gone up, you might say, well, I better hold off on that renovation project. But holding off on the renovation project also means that you are not going to get top dollar for your home if you were going to renovate and sell. So then you hold off on putting your home on the market, decreasing supply in the market. And again, so where does it end? Supply chain disruptions occur, inflation occurs, impacts interest rates. So all of this will come into play. And, speaking on tariffs, it's nothing new. Back in 2018, um, good President Donald Trump there imposed 25% on steel and 10% on aluminum. And then Canada responded with equivalent countermeasures on US products. And in 2019, both nations agreed that these tariffs should be done away with, which they did. And then in August of 2020, Trump reinstated the 10% tariff on certain aluminum, Canadian aluminum. So it just, there's a lot of back and forth, and there isn't any sort of stability from that. But it's not, if we go back into history, we can see that this has been his way of trying to get a win.
Right.
And once he gets the win, he's like, okay, I got this. Now this one got old, and
Yeah.
you're fighting back too much, so I'm going to pull back. And then later on, he imposes it again because he wants another win. And so we're going to see this back and forth, cat and mouse sort of thing happening, I think, for the next 4 years, sadly. So let's just get used to it. Let's stomach it. Let's not get overly concerned about it, because there's a good chance that there will be countermeasures. And when those countermeasures and when we start fighting back, and we hope that the Canadian politicians will fight back
Yeah.
and stand up for Canadians. I think a lot of this will just start disappearing again. And again, not a politician, but we'll have to see where this goes.
And you bring up a lot of good points. I think back to, during the pandemic, for example, where people, they weren't able to get out of their homes. They weren't able to do much. But one of the first things they started doing was looking at renovations. And then all of a sudden, the cost of lumber shoots through the roof, and you can't get the work done. You're right. It's that idea of it does seem to bounce back and forth over and over again. And it's as we've said before, you want to just kind of stay ahead of the game if you can. And I think the other key thing is, if this makes Canadians sort of, bond together in some way and say, there's other ways that we can deal with things, or there might be other markets out there we want to take a look at. Like you said, you're not a politician. I'm not either, and I don't claim to be one. But it's that idea of, there's got to be, in most relationships between nations, it's not a win lose, because why would you ever do business with that other nation? It's got to be a win for both sides in some ways. And I hopefully, cooler heads are going to prevail, and we'll keep our fingers crossed anyway. Um,
Yeah, and
oh
we're
yeah,
going to
sorry,
see,
go ahead.
sorry, we're going to see, again, a countermeasure might be lumber, right?
Mhm.
So, so much of our BC lumber is going to the US. Um, And right now, with all that's going on in California with the wildfires,
Right.
lumber is going to be in huge demand there, and there isn't enough lumber or mills to produce the lumber needed for reconstruction. So there's going to be a lot, and I don't think that it's really been well thought out. So again, like you said, we'll have to just wait and see how this plays out.
Speaking of waiting and seeing, we know that the next Bank of Canada announcement is coming up in less than a month. We've seen things turn around and moving in the right direction. We had a couple of big jumps, or big reductions rather, and then the last one wasn't as big. But based on your experience, what do you think is going to be happening in that next announcement?
So there's a lot to do. So inflation was the big thing, because depending on where the inflation numbers are, that had an impact on what's going to happen with the Bank of Canada on the next amount announcement. Right now, the Bank of Canada rate cut odds are dropping
Okay.
due to the strong job growth.
Right.
So Canada's unemployment rate fell to 6.6% in January from 6.8% in December. So that means that 76,000 jobs were added, which is significantly beating the expectation of only 25,000 jobs. So market expectations for March 12th, which is the Bank of Canada date for the rate announcement, economists expected that there's an 80% chance that rate will drop by at
Hmm.
least a quarter percent. Following these job numbers, now that number has dropped to 55%. So let's call it a 50-50 chance
Right.
that there is going to be a rate cut. And if there is a rate cut, I don't expect it to be more than a quarter percent.
Okay.
Again, we're still on target to get this Bank of Canada rate down to 2.5% uh, sometime this year. So they may skip, but again, there's the opportunity. If they skip it, that means prices are not going to go up on houses,
Yeah.
which allows you to come in, and even if you're going to pay a little bit more each month for a shorter term, stick to the variable.
Right.
The
Right.
opportunity is going to be there to save, thousands and thousands of dollars and probably pay just a few $100s more a month until the rates can come down. So again, speak to your trusted financial advisor, mortgage broker, banker, and get their sort of take on what they're recommending. But following that variable route is going to probably be the right way to go for the next 12 months anyways.
All right, and that's we've got a chance to take it. We can look at the February job numbers as well too before that final decision. But and as it is a bit of a wait and see game, but we're able to at least get an idea of where, and we're heading in the right direction because 2 years ago we were having different conversations than we are right now. Um,
Absolutely.
we're coming up in a break here on Ask the Experts. When we come back, what you need to know when it comes to power of sale. Stay with us here on 570 News Radio. Welcome back to the show. My guest today is Faisal Susiwala, recently named as the #1 Remax agent worldwide in terms of sales volume and number of homes sold. If you'd like your chance to chat with Faisal yourself, you can start by going to homeshack.com. You can also call Faisal directly, 519-624-5555. Email works as well, Faisal@homeshack.com. So Faisal, power of sale sounds like a menacing term, uh, and probably one that most homeowners don't want to talk about, but it could rear its ugly head at some point. What do we need to know, and how do we kind of again keep ahead of these things?
It's a sad reality, and we're seeing it in our community even at this point. It was a rare occurrence, especially during the times of COVID and during times of lower interest rates, for us to hear the word power of sale. In the 90s, we saw a lot of it. We saw a little bit of it in the mid 2000s, 2007, 2008, 2009, a little bit in 2014. Then we didn't hear about power of sales. It was very rare to even hear the word power of sale. So in Canada, power of sale is a legal process that allows the lender to sell a property when a homeowner defaults on their mortgage. Unlike foreclosures, this method is faster and doesn't require court approval. Okay.
Okay.
So a home typically goes under power of sale after multiple missed payments. So typically it can be 30 days, 45 days, 60 days, depending on the lender.
Okay.
They may give you a little bit of a grace period to, come up with the arrears. But if you fail to do so, the lender can basically list the property for sale after the proper legal notices have been given. And while those legal notices are given, your legal costs are just skyrocketing because
Yeah.
every time you're
Yeah.
sending a letter, it's coming from Bay Street and it's thousands of dollars for that lawyer to send you the letter.
Right.
And you need to respond to what's your next step? What are you doing? How are you going to get it back on the market? Or what are you going to do to come up with the arrears? Um, in this situation, you as the owner that is has fallen behind still owns the property. So it's
Okay.
not, you haven't forfeited. So it's not a foreclosure where you have forfeited your rights to the property and the bank now owns it. So they don't actually own it. They have to invoke the power of sale in order to own it. And during this time frame, you still have the opportunity to catch up
Okay.
and pay back the bank right up to and including the closing date. So if you're buying a home, and I've seen this two times in my career of 37 years, where on the day of closing or just before the day of closing, the person who was about to lose their home, fortunately came up with the money and was
Okay.
able to redeem the home by paying out all the arrears, paying out the mortgage, but it doesn't happen very often. So when you buy a power of sale property, you're also saying to the lender that I'm buying this property as is, and I understand
Yeah.
that although I'm buying it, I may not actually get it, and I'm buying it as is condition, and I'm assuming all liabilities, et cetera, liens, et cetera. So there's no warranties being given at that time. It's just so important not to get yourself into a position where you've let your finances go that far. So get a professional in,
Okay.
understand what your rights are. I had a recent situation where somebody was at the 60-day mark of not being able to make their payments. They had already accumulated over $8,000 in legal fees, $16,000 behind on their mortgage payments. So it was a fairly large mortgage because they had a first and a second, and of course, eight to $10,000 a month was their mortgage payment, which is, is just staggering these numbers when you hear them. Um, they were ready to mail in the keys to the lender and said, just take my house, do what you want to do. Upon reviewing their home and appraising it, there was a significant amount. I believe it was around $150,000 in equity there. So even
Okay.
after paying commissions, paying the $30,000 in arrears, paying the legal fees, there was still a pretty good chance that these folks could come out with $50,000 to $60,000 in their pocket. But what we had to do was come up with the funds to make the arrears go away. So that 30 or $40,000 that was owed, we I personally arranged the funds for those folks to be able to take, so basically got the wolf away from the door, and
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
allowed them to have a little bit of breathing space so I could sell the property. And fortunately, by the time everything was said and done, they walked away with $80,000, whereas they thought it was the end of the line for them and they would have to just mail in the keys and call it a day. And now at least they had some money, although their credit was done.
Right. Right.
At least they had enough money that they could write a check for 1 year's worth of rent payment and have somewhere to go that was decent. So there's a lot of options available, but
Okay.
it's nothing to be embarrassed about. People fall behind. And now, sadly, it's due to job losses or the interest rates just went so high that the income levels were not keeping up with their payments.
And as you talked about that, there's this sort of ripple effect. This if this happens, your credit is shot. You've got legal issues that might be following you for a little while as well too. So as we've said before, whenever you're dealing with a situation like this, communication's got to be key. Before you can't bury your head in the sand. You can't just turn your back and think it's the end of the line. Get a hold of your lender and say, look, I've lost my job. I don't, are there some other ways that we can make this happen rather than just, buying a lottery ticket and hoping for the best, right? Communication's always got to be number one.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes.
Um, you had mentioned in your pre-show notes the idea that there's some key housing laws that are going to be changing this year as well too in the province. Who is it going to be impacting the most, and what's happening right now?
So yeah, the like Ontario is implementing major housing law changes for this year, focusing on tenant protections,
All right.
affordability, sustainability, and there are about five key updates here. So Toronto rental renovation license bylaw. So, you can't really evict somebody based on renovictions. There's a whole procedure that has to go through. Building permits have to be issued, application fees have to be paid. So there's a lot of tenant accommodation and compensation plans that are being implemented.
Right.
That will be all effective as of July of 2025. Okay, so it's still in process. Now timber buildings. So we were talking about timber earlier and more
Mm.
wood production. Timber buildings, they had a cap on the maximum stories that you could use for timber construction, and
Right.
that was 12. Now that is being increased to up to 18 stories
Wow. Okay.
can be built from timber, which is promoting sustainability and cost efficiency, especially if our steel prices go up due to tariffs,
Oh,
then there's a better option here. And we have lots of timber in Canada, so that's actually good news. That's already in effect as of January 1st.
all right.
Uh, Streamlining the Ontario Building Code. So that aligns with the National Building Code. Each province has its own. So there's a reduction of over 1,730 differences
Wow.
to simplify approvals and construction. So it's more of just making it easier
Yep.
and more conforming across Canada. So if you're a builder from BC or Calgary or Nova Scotia, and you come into Ontario or vice versa, you're not having to basically learn the book again. And then final phase of Toronto's short-term rental rules. So stricter
Right.
regulations on short-term rentals, primary residences being the only ones that you could have short-term. So you can't buy a bunch of rental units and turn them into Airbnbs. So that is still underway. That's the final phase on that. And lastly, updated income limits for housing assistance. So high need income limits, which is HNLS, has been increased to reflect rising housing costs. So Toronto's high need income for a one-bedroom unit rose from $37,500 to $40,500. So that's the new ceiling for qualifying for that housing assistance. And so that's good. I mean, uh, although income levels are not going up at the pace that people wish it would, at least there's some relief on how much income you are earning before the rise.
At the same time, we know, Faisal, we're heading into income tax season, and we've had these discussions in the past. So you seem to always have in your back pocket that list of some important tax incentives that you might want people to be aware of, and maybe you can give us your top five or so. What's on your mind for this year when it comes to tax season?
Okay, so here are the few key programs we should be aware of. So
All
the
right.
Canada Child Benefit increased by 4.7% in July of 2024. So families with children under six now receive up to $7,787 per year, while those with kids aged 6 to 17 receive up to $6,570. This is on the Canada Child Benefit. So another increase is expected in July of this year,
Okay.
and that the next CCB payment is coming on February the 20th. So
Right. This
next
is
week.
the coming week. Yeah.
Or coming week, yeah, exactly. The Canada Dental Care Plan, that is available for seniors 65 plus or children under 18 and adults with a federal disability tax credit certificate. So we're seeing the Canada Dental Care Plan implemented now. GST HST credit, a tax-free quarterly payment designed to help low and modest income families offset sales tax. So we're seeing that come in
Yep.
quarterly. And then we have the Child Disability Benefit, which is a tax-free benefit for families with children who are under 18 eligible for disability tax credit. And I believe there's that Canada WCB
Right.
is the next one. So we're
So yeah.
seeing we're seeing a few different um, taxes that are being relieved. We're seeing a few different credits that are coming in. And then, of course, we just came out of the GST holiday, which was our 2 month GST holiday on kids' goods. We saw the break on our restaurant bills, our takeout bills. So it's nice to see that there is some benefit that's coming back to the Canadians from the government, and whether it's quarterly or through these little tax breaks that we're getting. But there's certainly it's well needed right now.
Absolutely. You hit the nail on the head. We can all use a little bit extra in our pockets right now. We'll take a quick break and we'll get an update from the 570 News Center. When we come back, what Canada Mortgage and Housing is saying these days. Stay with us here on 570 News Radio. Welcome back to the show. My guest today, Faisal Susiwala, also known as the top real estate broker in the world for REMAX. Listeners, if you'd like a chance to chat with Faisal yourself, you can start by going to homeshack.com. You can also call Faisal directly, 519-624-5555, or through email, faisal@homeshack.com. Faisal, at the start of the show, we had a chat about where the real estate market is at the moment. We know that Canada Mortgage and Housing, they've got their own take on things as well, too. What do you know about the outlook from CMHC this year?
Well, it's they're always conservative, right? So we're not going to get rave reviews about 2025. So it's an uncertain market ahead. From CMHC's perspective, it's unpredictable as to what's going to happen, especially due to the trade tariff, right? So that's the big underlying or the dark cloud above the optimism that should be in the market right now. So increased US tariffs up to 25 could weaken the Canadian dollar. So
Yep.
that's their number one issue, which reduces investment and heightens recession risk. So there's a conservative approach here that's happening. The housing recovery timeline, which was expected to happen by the end of 2025,
Mhm.
could now be advanced into 2026. So that's another issue. But we are expecting that the rates will continue to drop. If it's not the first quarter, it will happen later on, but that is still happening. Resale homes will likely see stronger demand over new homes. And new construction. And we've already seen that,
Right.
especially condos. Condos are probably going to suffer the most. Developers are struggling to sell pre-construction units right now. And again, that goes with the uncertainty because a lot of people, when they don't know what's going to happen, don't want to sign up for something that's a year down the road or 18 months. They'd rather buy, and we have some great pre-construction projects and construction projects that are brand new that are not that far off into the future, but you still get the new home that you want within 3 to 6 months. So there's opportunities that are still, especially in our region, there's a lot of construction that is going on where you can still move into your home May, June, July this summer, and you still get the new home, you still get to pick your colors and whatnot, but you're not dealing with the uncertainty of what's going to happen a year down the road. And then, of course, in Alberta and Quebec, the affordability is greater, so it will outperform what's happening in the rest of Canada. And we'll also see an easing in the rental market.
Okay.
With lower immigration, more first-time home buyers moving into ownership as a result of prices not going up, it will reduce the rental demand. Investors are exiting a lot of their condos, which they overpaid for,
Right.
especially if their
Right.
condo fees are very high. They're not getting the rent that they were expecting. Their interest rates are so high that their payments are too high. So because of all of those reasons, we're going to see an influx, and we're already seeing an influx of apartment style condos hitting the market at very reasonable pricing, but there's not a lot of takers for that. And rents will stabilize. Affordability challenges are still going to persist. Even though rents have stabilized and they've come down, we're still up 11 to 12% over what the average rents were in this region. So we're still seeing that. So there's a lot of uncertainty, like I said, but towards the end of the year and early next year, we should see all of that sort of work itself out.
And as you're saying, maybe take these suggestions with a grain of salt. If they're looking at it through that conservative lens, they don't want to put themselves too far out there. And it's a little bit different when it goes to other aspects of all of the economic pieces that are going on. Faisal, I was hoping to shift gears a little bit with this next topic. In the pre-show notes that you'd sent over, there's a write-up about folks with the same income. Let's say you've got two people; they both earn $100,000 a year, as an example. They can either go one of two ways in some instances, where either they thrive financially, or they can end up broke. And I guess in your mind, what's the sort of telltale sign in situations like this? And you would think if you've got the same amount of money, you're going to be heading in the same direction, but that's not always the case.
No, unfortunately, it's not. High income doesn't necessarily equal financial stability. And nearly half of six-figure earners, $100,000 plus earners, still live paycheck to paycheck.
Wow.
So a lot of that has to do with bad financial habits. It's overspending, putting everything on credit card, the figuring you'll just make the payment at the end of the month, and then the
Yep.
next month you don't make that payment, and then it accumulates and it just keeps adding up. 36% of those earning $200,000 plus still struggle financially. Now, of course, there's cost of living that's gone up, gas prices, grocery costs, housing, shelter, etc. It's all contributing to this. But again, it comes right back down to lifestyle expenses. Are you spending, overspending? Are you putting away? And the rule really is if you put 20% of your income away, and let that accumulate, invest it, whether it's in real estate or mutual funds or high interest savings accounts, whatever it may be, just start putting some money away. We're seeing that budgeting is not, and we've talked about this many times about
Mm,
financial literacy, but budgeting is the game changers, and
right.
most people are not budgeting. Maybe they just don't want to face, their expenses and freak out because of that. But it's better to do that than get into a situation where you've let it go for so long
Right.
that now there's no way out of it, and then it creates bad credit, creates bankruptcies. Um, and that's where it is. So simply just tracking your expenses. There's all kinds of tracking tools. Even
Yep.
your online banking will tell you, oh, this month you're, in line with what you were spending last month, or your
Right.
spending is 10% or 15% higher than what it was. So it kind of gives you a check and balance right there. But having that little bit of a nest egg is so important. And having an emergency fund. And
Right.
most Canadians still don't have that, unfortunately. It was interesting. I read somewhere in the article that 37% of Canadians can't afford a $400 unexpected expense.
Wow.
So that's a scary number, where then they have to go and borrow that money but it's a reality of where we are right now. And it's also a reality because we've gotten so used to instant gratification and not delayed gratification. We want it now. We can tap and buy it now, and we'll
Yep.
worry about it later. That's maybe a good way to go when you're thriving, but you're not always thriving. And that's why there's the feast and famine, right? And sadly, a lot of us are dealing with famine right now in many aspects of our lives.
And we've talked about that idea before too. When you budget, and I know what I tend to do as well is kind of oftentimes I'll reverse budget. I'll take a look at, well, look at the last 2 weeks. Where did the money go? And it's not like it just vanishes, right? There are places, and that holds you accountable to say, okay, yeah, we need, you need groceries, you need gas for the vehicles, you need to pay your rent, or you've got your mortgage or the bills. That other disposable income, it, you've earned that, and why do you just want to kind of chuck it away if you can hang on to it? And that's easier said than done. I get that, but it's also important to take that time to look and say, here's where we are right now, here's where we were a year ago, and here's where we plan on being a year from now. And you write those goals down, and that's always got to be step number one, is to be honest with yourself.
Yes, I totally agree with that.
We've got a couple of minutes. One last topic for this section. Again, it was looking at these the pre-show notes. You mentioned in the pre-show notes the fact that, hey, inflation sometimes doesn't mean pain for everybody. And I thought, well, that's an interesting way to look at things, but you're absolutely right. Who can actually benefit when inflation hits?
Yeah, that narrative is misleading because wealthier, securely housed Canadians have actually gained from inflation, especially due to rising home values. So if you've owned a house in the last 5 years, you've enjoyed double or triple the value just because of inflation. So who's really hurting? It's the lower and middle income renters that are most affected. The rising home prices push rents higher as well because now they've got to cover higher payments and whatnot. So especially those in the top 40% of earners have seen their net worth rise significantly, but the lower and middle income uh, earners, renters have really suffered due to inflation. Young homeowners, believe it or not, have actually benefited as well. Home ownership amongst Canadians under 35 has jumped from 36% in 2019 to 44% in 2023. And many young homeowners got help from the Bank of Mom and Dad. So
Right.
the
Right.
wealthier, stable homeowners that we talked about that were not impacted were able to help their kids. And that bank of mom and dad, that entire sector is mortgage free, really, and they're
Right.
able to
Right.
help their kids. So those young homeowners are sort of a new sector that's entering that are sort of wealthy in their own way because of the fact that they've had this help. Of course, we've talked about inheritances in the past as well, and that's helped them. So the housing wealth creates social risks, of course. The gap between homeowners and renters is growing, making it harder for non-homeowners to ever afford a home. So we're seeing a lot of inequality. And again, everyone complains about inflation, but there's been unintended benefits to inflation, and it has been to those who. And I'm not saying that they don't deserve it. These are folks
Mhm.
that have probably spent their entire life saving, not spending, making right decisions, budgeting to get to the point where that inflation is actually benefiting them and getting their money out. So if they want to sell their property and retire, they're now in a position to do that.
Yeah, and absolutely right. We've talked about that before. That helping the next generation down, and that's what we all hope for our children is that they have a better life than we do. We'll take a final break here on Ask the Experts. When we come back, snowbirds, they're packing up and not heading south; they're heading north. And what's driving that exodus? You're listening to Ask the Experts here on 570 News Radio. Welcome back to the show. My guest today has been Faisal Susiwala, also known as the top real estate broker in the world for REMAX. Listeners, if you would like a chance to chat with Faisal yourself, start by going to homeshack.com. You can also call Faisal 519-624-5555 or through email, Faisal at homeshack.com. In this last section, Faisal, I pulled three of the stories that you had sent over, and I thought and they're timely and all interesting, and I thought it's kind of a neat one to start off with. For a lot of retired Canadians, this time of the year, we would normally see them heading to Florida, avoiding the snow, being a part of the snowbird crowd. But that scenario seems to be changing. What do you see happening with the numbers when it comes to snowbirds these days?
We're seeing them stay home a little bit more,
Right.
and not go to their Florida dwellings. They're renting out their homes in Florida, and it's primarily based on our loonie. We're at
Right.
a 69-cent dollar, and that is causing a lot of affordability issues for seniors who may have a property that's paid off and whatnot in Florida, but you still got to get there. You still have to spend in US dollars. And when the dollar is weak, it's not helping. So we're seeing a massive exodus in home sales, and nearly 25% of the homes that are for sale in Florida right now are foreign sellers, mostly Canadians,
Wow.
which has doubled from the year before. So we're
Mm,
seeing them exiting that market, which is now going to cause a lot of inventory to hit the market. Most folks hesitated to sell their property while the loonie was strong, but now they're selling because there is profits to be
mhm,
made. And they're coming out with decent money, but there's that, again, if there's oversupply, the prices are going to come down. But one of the major factors is that the condo fees have increased significantly.
right.
And
Right.
in some cases, they call them the HOAs there, is $1,500 US per month.
Wow.
So you can only imagine if your condo fees, and then you add 1.5 to that, really, when you do the exchange and whatnot, you're into $2,200 a month Canadian in condo fees. Most folks are not earning that in their retirement to
No.
sustain that, plus their home in Canada or whatever else they're doing. So we're going to see more and more exiting that Florida market or the U.S. market for that matter, which in turn might mean that U.S. citizens may decide to buy properties in Canada at some point, depending on, again, what the
Yeah.
political situation is, because they're getting a very good discount if they buy here.
A lot of people have been talking about that, and hard this time of the year when it's cold and it's snowy, and if you wanted it to be somewhere nice and warm, the go-to used to be, well, I'm going to pack up and go down to the States, go to the, Arizona, Florida. But a lot of conversations right now are about not spending our money south of the border and keeping it in within our own borders and looking at things differently. It's all about how you plan on enjoying yourself and can you enjoy the great outdoors and especially during the wintertime. I don't know if that's as easier said than done again, but the other story that came out was Kingston, where the penitentiary there. It's the old penitentiary. It's been there for years. It's a what there's a lot of historical value to it. What's going on in the Limestone City? What are they doing there?
Yeah, so there's a major draw for tourists and film
Right.
production that happens there, but they want to convert it into a housing project, housing development project.
Okay.
So Ottawa has listed the site for potential housing as part of the Public Land Bank initiative. So local officials argue that there would be other properties better suited for that, but of course, it's a large parcel of land, a big property, and but there's a lot of considerations. Retrofitting a maximum security prison into livable housing isn't simple. There's a lot
No,
of
no.
and often we've seen this. Sometimes it's cheaper just to tear something down and rebuild than to try to work with what's there. So I guess there's going to be a lot of discussion and talk, but it was an entertaining sort of read to see, you could be living in the Kingston Penitentiary at some point. But maintaining tourism would also get affected because it is a big tourist spot.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the historical and cultural value. If there might be some value in repurposing it into a museum or a cultural site. So there's a lot of different things happening, but we're going to see more and more public lands, public buildings that are surplus that rightfully so should be looked at for affordable housing and whatnot. And this is just one example of a fairly major site that could be converted into a housing development.
And as you're saying, it's not a one-off, right? There's a lot of other communities are doing the exact same thing. They're looking at these properties and saying, what do we do with them? They've served a purpose in one direction for years, but can we look at it? Can we tweak it? Can we turn it into affordable housing? And it's an interesting read for sure. Looking at what do you do with those buildings and with the historical significance in there as well too. Um, when as cities are struggling with this lack of housing, we know that some cities are taking novel approaches. I know in Scarborough, for example, they're looking at that idea of sixplexes, which we've seen them. They've been built in the past and they kind of went away. And we know that Kitchener is looking at something similar as well too. What are the cities doing to look at different possibilities when it comes to building housing?
So again, to sort of combat this whole housing shortage issue, an affordability issue municipalities have looked at since the last couple of years on converting single family homes and adding units, allowing them to be duplexes or even triplexes. This particular Ward 23 in Scarborough is now looking at 6 units per lot, which is a significant amount of housing on a single lot. Toronto's not alone in that approach, though.
Mm.
Kitchener and Guelph, considering allowing fourplexes to increase the housing supply per lot. Okay. London has already approved 4 unit buildings in low density areas as of 2023. Mississauga rejected it completely. And Windsor has not yet adopted any of that. So we'll see. But the initiative is part of Toronto's commitment to federal government in exchange to their mandate in exchange for 471 million in housing funding. So a lot of the municipalities risk losing the funding under the Ontario More Homes Built Faster Act, which was implemented in 2022, if they don't implement some of these housing starts.
Right.
So
Right.
we already are seeing in most municipalities 3 units allowed per single family lower density lot. And we could see up to 4 units even within our region starting to happen.
Right.
I believe Kitchener may already have it or is in the midst of approving that. Waterloo and Cambridge has not implemented that as of this point, if I'm correct.
And when you're looking at those things, you've got to take into consideration things like parking, things like mass transit, things like uh, just even when it comes to things like availability to to grocery stores and all of those other pieces as well. It's not a just a quick decision. We're going to do it this way. It fits in with all of these other pieces that are going on, and I think that's probably part of the hesitation in some ways when we're looking at these kinds of decisions.
Yeah, we're not in a region where we have subways and TTC and that type of infrastructure. So it would be irresponsible, in my opinion, in Cambridge, Kitchener, Waterloo to have a sixplex in a residential zone where parking isn't there. We're already seeing our streets turning into parking lots and people parking on curbs and boulevards and whatnot. So there has to be responsible infrastructure and mandates and planning that goes behind this. And there has to be some space for yard and amenity space and whatnot. You just can't pile people on top of each other. And sadly, we're seeing a little bit of that in our communities, especially when it comes to student housing. So, but I would say 3 to 4 units, depending on the size of the lot. And I think that's a doable solution for our region.
Okay. All right. And just like that, our hour is up, Faisal. The time always flies by when you and I start talking. Thanks so much for coming on the show today. It's always a pleasure to chat with you, and you've always got great insights into what's going on.
Thanks for having me on, Brock.
It's a pleasure to have you here. That was Faisal Susiwala, top real estate broker, recently published author of the book The Real Deal: Billion-Dollar Real Estate Broker. It's available on Amazon. Get yourself a copy of that as well too. He's also someone who knows what he's talking about when it comes to the real estate market. Thanks to you listeners as well for joining us. You've been listening to Ask the Experts here on 570 News Radio.